So I'm going to talk about it really in terms of a kind of an organisation rather than an individual. And I'm going to refer back, I'm going to talk about STAMMA. I'm also going to be talking about a charity that I launched in 2006 and ran until 2016 called CALM, or the Campaign Against Living Miserably. And that was dedicated to preventing male suicide. So what's stigma? Stigma is a mark of disgrace associated with a particular person, circumstance, quality. It leads to labelling and exclusion, discrimination, hostility, stereotyping. It leads to feelings of shame, unworthiness, a lack of confidence, depression, and social isolation. And I think it's really important, if we are going to tackle stigma, to think about what that means and really dig down into it if we're going to actually address it. So I think a kind of key part of addressing stigma is thinking about the message that we have. The stigma around male suicide in 2006, it was a toxic subject. Nobody really wanted to talk about it. And nobody certainly wanted a charity thinking about it. The assumption, and it took ages to kind of really dig down into what that was that male suicide wasn't very popular because it was something that weak men do, because they're inadequate and not proper men. So thinking back about and thinking about stammering, what is it about stammering? What's the assumption there? And I think the assumption is that these are people who aren't physically in charge of themselves. They've got learning problems, they're nervous, they can't control how they speak. I think it's important to try and nail what that is in order to address it, because unless we do, we don't address it. So the reality that we push back on for male suicide is that actually everyone hits a wall at some point. Things go wrong. Women are allowed to talk about it, but men are seen as unmanly if they do. Men don't really talk, they don't show emotion. That's what being a proper man is. They're not very good at emotion, despite the fact that we have worlds of brilliant literature, art, music. There's the idea that they're not very good at communicating. What nonsense. So I think on stuttering, we need to push back and insist that it's physical. It can't be magicked away. Yes, of course, it can get worse and better depending on how you feel and depending on who knows what. But it's a reality that people live with. That's it. So thinking about the messaging. If we start from the premise that the world needs to understand how it feels to stutter or stammer, I think we're off on the wrong track. I don't stammer. I've no idea what it means. I don't think I ever will. And so I think people immediately get lost in the weeds and think about, so how did it start? What causes it? Why is it so weird? Stuttering is great. It is for some, it's not for others. Having a stutter is terrible. It is for some, it's not for others. People who stutter are discriminated against. If we go back to that toxic idea that this is a kind of a terrible moral or physical weakness, then that would follow. They would be discriminated against. It doesn't help to say that just off the bat. People who stutter aren't stupid. No, they're not. But kind of that's a sentence which has got a dead end. So we've gone for it's how we talk. It's an affirmative starting point. It doesn't invite pity or wonder. It's a statement of how things are, not how they might be cured. It's a launch point then for further action. I stutter, don't interrupt. Don't use negative language. I need to see me represented in the media. I think images are really, really important too. When I started CALM, this was pretty much the kinds of images that were used and still are for some people around male suicide. They're pretty depressing. My job was to get guys to use a phone line and also to get people to support the charity. As a starting point, this was a non-starter. This puts people off. It might be how you feel. If you're selling a product for weight loss, would you really put a very large guy on the front of it, or would you put a guy who's looking thin? Images are really crucial. They're about how you look. So when I launched Calm, this was our first, back in 2006, website. You could skin it according to different kinds of music themes. I wanted it to be associated with music, to feel upbeat, to attract our audience. This was one of the postcards, the early postcards. We used humor. So this is a kind of postcard with feeling shit written on it, on what looks like a toilet roll. Dark humor, for fuck's sake, cheer up. Save the male, a kind of a play on words, going back to the 70s and when we were saving the whale. Propaganda, catalogue of stereotypes aimed at making you a manly man, proper bloke, top lad. We mucked about with the words. We kept pushing that the line that male suicide was a huge killer, but we tried to do that with humor, and with a light touch and not a kind of wagging finger. So how did that impact, and how did Calm grow? So this was a percentage when we kind of had some money to track it, 2010 or 12, we could look and see what the awareness of Calm was as a charity. Could you identify Calm? Was it a pill? Was it a sofa? Was it a charity? And we can see how that increased in 2015. Awareness of male suicide moved in lockstep with that awareness of Calm. We can see that it was us having that impact. In 2006, journalists would not believe me that it was such a big killer. People just said I'd got the figures wrong all the time. I'd got the figures wrong. By 2016, 2017, that was no longer happening at all. And this is a fairly fuzzy figure. You can see the growth of income for the organisation. It went from 12,000 that year in 2006 to 1.6 million in 2016-17. People felt able to identify with a charity which talked about this toxic issue. Families felt able suddenly and finally to say that their son had taken his life. And now talking about mental health is in a completely different world. Where would you rather sit? There's an NHS, kind of UK NHS service on the right, and then they're kind of a very beautiful waiting room on the left. The service that you get at the end of that may well be much better on the right. But the images that you use talk about and tell you not just about the service. They give you an idea of the service they would like to provide. They also tell you how they view you, how they view your audience, how we view ourselves, and how you feel about how you are. So brand, I believe, is really important. These are the images that a kind of a quick search around stuttering or stammering reveal. They're all about the physicality of it. They're kind of quite medical. If we continue to use these images, this is what we're saying about our audience, about us. We approached an agency to help us rebrand. I believe that was really important and much better than approaching your best friend or mate that you know that can draw. Because marketing is what some people do for a living. They sell ice cream or cars, they sell things. They sell things which make us feel a different way about ourselves and about what it is that we're buying. We couldn't afford to pay for that. But the invitation to an agency is to help you change the world. And there's nothing more exciting than that. Because actually selling soap for a living can get quite boring. And here is an opportunity to do something which can win awards, which can bring your agency to the top and do good at the same time. So the brand that we built was bold and upbeat. Wasn't about all the kind of the stuff around the face or the head. STAMMA is memorable because it's spelt wrong. And I know that lots of people have that issue, but at least it's memorable. We need to stick in people's minds. The brand and the logo stutter. They are deliberately disrupted. But the fonts and are bold and the colours are bold. What it is that we're trying to do isn't just get in the way and get in the face of all those people who don't stammer, but it's about how we feel and create and make people who do stammer or stutter feel. I think what's really important is not just to do public campaigns or to do the one-to-one support, but to work across the spectrum, to provide that individual support when people are in crisis. That community support is absolutely essential. And then there's that public engagement. The one-to-one support empowers people to take action in their own lives, to feel comfortable talking about their stammer, to look for changes at work, to help others and meet others, and to inform employers and the media and parents about what that means. So the one-to-one support is really important. In community, the community provides friendship and succor over a period of time. It provides all of those different experiences, and it has the power to create a new normal. And that's what we're about, creating that new normal, whether that's a kind of a local group or an online community. And a community has the collective power of representation and influence. So where one voice might be strong, many behind a message can influence lasting change, provided you've got those messages right. So back to campaigns. At CALM, we could not get the media to take our messaging. They would hear and finally be convinced about the numbers, but when you wanted to talk about gender, they blanked it and they just wanted one case study, and then they pulled the wings off a young guy, pointed out that he broke up with his girlfriend, drank too much, lost some money, that's why he took suicide. That didn't help us on our messaging. So I stopped talking to the media entirely. The website's great. It means that you've got control over your messaging, but only for those looking at it. Social media is good because you can leverage things, but only to your supporters, unless you can get on the back of a bigger story or reach influencers. Advertising is my choice because if we just have one thing, one ad, a good looking ad, we can approach people who sell advertising for a living and ask them to put your ad up there. And if it looks good, and if your organization looks good, then they'll take it, because most agencies have spare space which they need to fill. They don't want a blank space. So this was I'm not going to play it. So this was a video promoting the kind of the negative language that that has been used, and then finishing on "It's how we talk," that big pushback message. When Apple did that stupid emoji, when we pushed that out on our and pushed back at Apple for being offensive, because this is how we talk, that message and that story went absolutely global, and just went around the world because Apple is such a big name. And so, yeah, so social media can be really brilliant. The ads that we got were, very simple messaging. I think sometimes when we sit down and kind of go, okay, how can we change the world? We end up with billions of messages all interconnected, and we've got a really kind of complex visual with words all over the place. If we're going to really land and tackle the stigma, we need to do it in crayon so that it's really easy to understand that what it is that we're saying. Again, this campaign was a really simple message, but it meant that we could take this artwork and then replicate it and put it into lots of different formats. So it went on outdoor, it went on social. No diversity without disfluency. This ad was actually, we paid for, not terribly much at all. It was created by a young guy called Daniel Liatka, who's a member, who also works at an agency and it was created for peanuts. It's a simple ad. It went great on social media. We approached Pearl and Dean. It's now showing on thousands of cinemas up and down the UK from here until October. Landing the message and demanding that people who STAMMA be represented in the media. So looking at what success looked like and how does that happen? How does it look when it happens? At Calm, this is really what I wrote down from the experience at Calm. There was an increase in supporters and then in volunteers and income, because it's such a big killer. More media coverage, then more groups and networks, and then other organizations springing up. And at the time you think, well, come to the mothership, don't start a new organization. But actually, it's brilliant when that happens. To have lots of organizations doing stuff is a reflection that the cultural change is starting to take place. And then there's corporate support, and then finally there's celebrity support. And by the time you reach those two top things, much of your messaging is already out in the atmosphere and is taken up by magazines and newspapers and other groups all over. So if we're successful, more people will say that they stammer and would be represented in the media. Companies will be better informed, services more stammer friendly, and people who stammer will respond better to those who do. Negativity will improve and more people will feel comfortable stammering. So in summary, I think if we're going to tackle the stigma around stammering, we have to think about those underlying messages. And I'd suggest moving to acceptance and has that as the start point. Yes, some people don't want to stammer. Some people would like to hide their stammer. But the fact is that that is how some people talk. We're not trying to tell people who stammer to accept it. What we are trying to do is tell the public that it happens. The repositioning and rebranding, that needs to kind of go not just on one advert or on your homepage, throughout all of the things that you do. You need to work across all streams and then be bold in your public messaging. And then finally and boringly align the resources that you've got with the plan. And where you can see a gap, go and seek the money that you need. And then monitor what it is that you're doing to see whether or not it works. You need to have those indicators to know whether or not it's working or whether it's going badly. Thank you very much for that. I hope that was useful. Oh, dead silence. Tom, were there some questions?
Yes, Jane, you don't stutter,
No.
right?
No, I don't.
Why do you do all this?
Because when I was looking at this job, at STAMMA or the BSA, someone made a joke about it. And I thought, if you can make a joke about it, then I've got some work I can do. Because I've done changing culture around male suicide. And I would really like to do that again. And my skill is that I don't stammer. So I'm not thinking about my personal journey. I'm thinking about others' personal journey. And I'm thinking about, how do I change the public and the people who don't stammer, because they're the problem. We can't change whether or not someone stammers, but we can change how the public responds to that. And that's the job that I'm really excited about.
I totally agree with you.
Anita?
It was Farid first, I think.
Farid?
Yeah. Hi, thanks, Jane. That's a very good presentation. Just wondered your reason for linking male suicide with stuttering, and what is the link, and why you think suicide and stuttering are interlinked, and why you chose those two themes.
I don't think they're linked. No, this was my previous job. So in 2006, I launched a charity, and so that was around male suicide. What I'm saying is there are similarities in learning how to do something. That's all. I'm not saying there is a link at all, although obviously some people will take their lives. What I'm saying is that I gave an example of tackling stigma, looking at the toxic message there was around being a man taking his life, and then what you then needed to do to overcome it. So I think what we need to do in the stammering community is to examine the toxic message that there is around stuttering or stammering, and then think about how we push it back against it. We can't just making people aware of stammering doesn't address anything at all. Everyone knows that people stammer. It's no good. We have to think about what's that underlying assumption that people who don't stammer have, and then tackle it. So I was just using as an example a previous job.
Yes, thank you. But for me personally, I didn't find that helpful, to be honest. It seems that it's interlinked, and that's not the case. So yeah.
I didn't mean to link it in that way at all. I meant just to. Okay, Anita.
Yeah, I've been in the media many times, and but the thing is, what they want to hear is that poor little girl who suddenly got cured and now doesn't stutter anymore, which is crazy. As they are sitting in my room for 1 to 2 hours, hearing me stutter, but they still want that story. And it also helps if you have research on this famous person. I was asked to come to this morning studio, but I could only come if I had a famous person who stutters with me. So we have to change that. This is just nonsense, but it is, as you say, we should maybe not talk about stuttering, but the impact that it has on us, and also raising awareness what other people can do, because they don't know the impact it has. So we have to explain that. And with your projects, they are just so amazing. As I wrote in the chat, they are so simple, and because of this simpleness, this simplicity, it's so easy to use it, both as an organization, but also as people who stutter, and social media is so very, very powerful. So I'm so happy that we can ride on your waves that you make through STAMMA.
Thank you. Michael, you're on mute.
Michael O'Shea, I'm a person of verbal difference. I stutter. And I've been around the stuttering community as an advocate for a long, long time. And it hit me about 5 years ago that if we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to be in the same place in 20 years' time. Now, social media has made a big, big change. And I could see your concepts are fantastic. But where I come from is this, and it's very, very simple. We need to educate the educators of the consequences of stuttering, of each phase in their life. The educators are, number one, the parents. Number one, the younger school children. Number two, when they move on to the next part of their education, university. We started a campaign in Ireland last September. We launched it last September, but we researched it and came up with our plan of action. It took us 12 months before the launch, and we approached it in a completely different way. And the way was, we were going to see how the teachers reacted to a child who stutters, how the lecturers in university reacted to a student who stutters, and how employers and HR companies reacted to a person looking for a job, how the health services, doctors, people at high positions, life and death situations reacted to a person who stutters, have them in their teams. What we found out was there was two approach avoidance conflicts. There was the approach avoidance conflict on the side of the person who stutters, holding back, avoidance, not being themselves, not being able to express, and the holding back on the other side, the teacher. They were as embarrassed as the person who stutters. So the void, the wall was built immediately. With the child in school, bang, feeling of difference. The teacher didn't know how to approach the child. In Ireland, 3 hours in their education in university goes.
Michael.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple of other people put their hands up, and I not sure how much time we have.
Yeah. The point I'm trying to make is that if we keep approaching it the old way, but what's at the center of it with the person who stutters is the feeling of difference. That's where it starts. That's where it continues. And we need to educate the people who educate our children. Michael O'Shea.
Thank you. Okay, thanks, Michael. Kunal.
First off, Jane, thanks so much for sharing that. It resonated with me on so many different levels. One thing I want to ask you, because I personally feel that there isn't enough time spent on the mental health component of stuttering, which is why I love just your previous background as well, coming from the suicide, coming into the stuttering. So like has there been anything you've learned just in terms of the suicide experience, just from the mental health component that you see from there, similar to what from the mental health component you've seen from the stuttering community? Because from a personal perspective, I feel like this correlation was actually very powerful for me as I think about the mental health component and some of the similarities here. Yeah, just love to hear your thoughts there.
Thank you. What are the messages that I wanted to convey to guys who were feeling suicidal? Was that what they were feeling was normal. They were normal. There was nothing wrong with them. That was a normal response to quite often difficult situations. And I think when you're seen, when you're accepted as being normal and okay, even if you are feeling suicidal, even if you stutter, then that changes how you feel about yourself. And so I think that we can, and there was the suggestion that we start at schools, or that we start in colleges, or that we start much younger. The problem with that is that it then becomes a kind of a lecture from your lecturer, from your school. It's not part of the surrounding. You have somebody telling you from a position of power that, your stutter is normal, or feeling suicidal is something that, having that mental health problem is something that many people go through. I didn't want to go down that route. What I wanted was to, if a young man heard from another young man that he was feeling suicidal in a way that was empowering, if a young man heard a celebrity talking about feeling suicidal, that was good. If he could see, or if a child can see an adult stammering in the public eye, that makes them feel great. That makes them feel normal. And so the strategy that I've been using is to not talk about the impact, but to have a more outward, aggressive stance, which just says, I stammer, so don't do this. This is how you behave. But to try and do that in a way which is a bit funny and a bit lighthearted, so that you're not medicalizing the thing. You're not medicalizing feeling suicidal, because actually it's a human condition. It's what everyone feels at some point when things go badly wrong. What I'm trying to do is to make people who stammer feel that they're part of this wider community, that they're normal. They've got differences. I've got differences. We're, and they are entitled to be heard. And I think if we can do that, and then a lot of the stress of talking differently will be much easier to handle. But I'd like the young kid at school to see that on a billboard rather than from the teacher. I think at some point, and now we have, in the UK, we've got teachers talking about mental health. We've got everyone and their mum talking about mental health, and there's lots of strategies, and they're great. But I think to start with, we have to really kind of raise the whole ground and look at the art and look at the words and the arguments that we use to tackle that central idea that people who stammer just aren't in control of their bodies.